Okay, I want to look at something from Colossians, but I want to start in Galatians. And I want to start I'm going to say some statements here that because I'm going to post this on YouTube. So the statements I'm saying, the people in this room have done the work with me. We've done it together. So they're going to know what I'm saying. If this is new information to anybody hearing this, I would invite you to please pause this, open up the book of Acts and read it. It's long, I know, but read it. Read it carefully and slowly and pay attention specifically with how Paul is treated when he starts his ministry. Who he goes to specifically, what he says, what they say in return, and then what happens when he goes to the next city, to the next assembly. Okay, but so anyway, if you do that, what you'll come to understand is that Paul had enemies. He had a specific group of enemies that followed him around place to place, stirred up trouble, had him stoned a few times. And if you read the book of Acts, then that enemy becomes absolutely clear who it is. They're called Judaizers. They're called Judaizers. They are people that were, there's actually two groups of them. There's the ones that were pharisaical and completely wrong, chasing him around, stirring up trouble everywhere he went. And then in Acts 15, we see another group, a group of Pharisees that believed in Yeshua. They stepped in the new covenant, but they were trying to impose the law of Moses onto Gentiles. That was the groups that, not so much the believers, they appear in Acts 15, but the other ones, they follow, read Acts, they follow him everywhere, and they are constantly coming against him. Now, when you read the letter to Galatians, Galatians is one of Paul's earliest writings during his ministry covered in the book of Acts. First Thessalonians and Galatians are two of his earliest writings. And he says some things in here that I know a lot of people know about, but in my opinion, when I learn something and I need to apply that when I read other things. So I like to kind of do that a little bit here and just come to a conclusion about something. But if you start in Galatians chapter 2, then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along also. And I went up because of a revelation. So he went up to Jerusalem here because of a revelation he received from Yeshua. And I laid out to them the gospel which I preach among the Gentiles. Okay, we know what that gospel is, 1 Corinthians 15. But, and what is it? What's he saying here? I went to them proclaiming the new covenant, is what he's saying. But I did it in private to those who were of reputation, lest somehow I might be running or had run in vain. So he's taking aside the rulers in Jerusalem, Peter and James and the guys, and he's telling them his gospel that he's taking to the Gentiles privately because he wants to get their thoughts on it. What do they have to say about it? He wants to make sure that he is running correctly. But not even Titus, who was with me, though he was a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. But this was because of the false brothers secretly brought in, who had sneaked in to spy out our freedom, which we have in Messiah Yeshua, in order to enslave us. These are brothers. It says they were false brothers, Acts 15. But we did not yield in subjection to them for even a moment, so that the truth of the gospel would remain with you. Now, we know who this group is because he's going to tell us in a minute who the group was. But from those who were of high reputation, what they were makes no difference to me. Yahuwah shows no partiality. Well, those who were of reputation contributed nothing to me. But on the contrary, on the other hand, seeing that I had been entrusted, Paul, with the gospel to the uncircumcision, the Gentiles, just as Peter had been to the circumcised. Because he who worked in Peter to his apostleship to the circumcised, we know who that is, worked in me, Paul, also to the Gentiles. And recognizing the grace that had been given to me, James, Cephas, and John, who were reputed to be pillars, gave to me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, so that we might go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. Only they asked us to remember the poor, the very thing I also was eager to do. But when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because he stood condemned. Because prior to the coming of certain men from James, believing Jews, right? These are the Yahudim who believed. They were the new covenant believers, like the 12. He used to eat meat with the Gentiles, or he used to eat with the Gentiles, not meat. We used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, that is, his brothers from Jerusalem, he began to shrink back and separate himself, fearing the party of the circumcision. These are believers, remember. What were they? These were believers, righteous Jewish believers, if you will, that were keeping the law of Moses lawfully. They saw Yeshua. They were keeping the feast, they were keeping the Sabbath, and they were doing it because they recognized it was showing them Yeshua. They had come to its conclusion, the goal of the Torah. The problem is not that they were keeping it. The problem is that they were imposing it on other people, as we'll see here. But when I saw that they were not straight, or actually in verse 13, and the rest of the Jews joined him in hypocrisy, Jewish believers, this is, with the result that even Barnabas was carried away by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, which there was no difference in a Jew and a Gentile anymore, that Peter knew that, Peter was shown that by a vision. I said to Peter before everyone, if you, being a Jew, live like the Gentiles, i.e., Paul saying you were just eating with them and living with them and being with them, and not like the Jews, how is it that you compel the Gentiles to live like Jews? How is it that you compel the Gentiles? What's it mean to live like Jews? It means to live according to the law of Moses. These are believers. These are Judaizing believers. We are Jews by nature and not sinners from among the Gentiles. Ephesians 2 tells us how the Gentiles were in times past. They had no covenants, they had no God, and they had no hope. Ephesians 2 tells us that very clearly. But through faith, ooh, we who are Jews by nature, not sinners among Gentiles, nevertheless, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law of Moses, we know what law he's talking about, but on the other hand, through the faith in Messiah Yeshua. Even we have believed in the works, who believed in Messiah Yeshua, so that we may be justified by faith in Messiah and not by the works of the law, since by the works of the law of Moses, no flesh will be justified. That wasn't the purpose of the law of Moses. It was to show them their sin so they could look for the seed that would come. But if, while seeking to be justified in Messiah, we ourselves also have been found sinners, is Messiah a minister of sin? May it never be. Because if I rebuild once I have once destroyed, I prove myself to be a transgressor. For through the law I died to the law, so that I might live to God. Because I have been crucified with the Messiah. And it is no longer I who live, but Messiah lives in me. And the life which I live in the flesh. I live by the faith in the Son of Yahuwah, who loved me and gave himself up for me. I do not set aside the grace of God, Because if righteousness comes through the law, that is the Mosaic law, then Messiah died needlessly. O foolish Galatians, who bewitched you before your eyes? Yeshua Messiah was publicly portrayed as crucified. This is the only thing I want to know from you. This is the thing that I want to ask my Hebrew brothers and sisters. Did you receive that Spirit by the works of the law of Moses or by the hearing with faith? Are you so foolish? Having begun by the Spirit, are you now being perfected by the flesh? Have you now been perfected by Sarah? Now you're going to go back and be perfected by Hagar, is what he's saying. And he's going to explain. And we know that's what he means because he's going to tell us that in detail in a couple chapters, or the next chapter, actually. Just then he tells us, just as Abraham believed Yahuwah, and it was counted to him as righteousness, so that those who are of faith are the sons of Abraham. And the scripture foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, proclaim the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, all the nations will be blessed in you. Okay, now go to Colossians chapter 2. Let's set the context. This is Paul writing. He's writing around Acts chapter 21 or 22, around that time frame. It's towards the end time of that 40-year period, right? This is a prison epistle. This was written after the events in Acts 28 when he was put into prison. He writes the prison epistles. This is one of those, right? It's written to who? To the church or the assembly at Colossae, the Colossians, Jews or Gentiles, both predominantly Gentile. This was outside of the land. These are Gentiles. Colossians, Gentile, just like Ephesus, Gentiles, right? Read about, we know that because we read about Paul's visit to Ephesus. It's Gentiles. So the book of Colossians is written to a predominantly Gentile church. That's important to understand. And it's also written after the events covered by the book of Acts 28. That's also important to note, in my opinion. So now, this is my contention. When Paul is writing Colossians, he is writing the church to warn them and to teach them about Judaizers. The book of Acts, like I said before, you have to know the book of Acts. It is very important because it tells you and it shows you who Paul's contention was with. It is with the Judaizers. They're the ones that chase him and stir up the crowds and drag him out and stone him. It is them that do that, right? With the exception when he goes to Ephesus and he starts telling them about he starts cutting into their pocketbooks because the lead idol maker was offended by Paul's teaching, and that caused all kinds of that caused a riot basically. But that was for money because he was losing business because people were coming out of the idolatry. But anyway, that's besides the point. So Colossians, you have to set the context. This is Paul writing. He's writing to the assembly at Colossia. It was mainly made up with Gentiles. It had some Jewish people for sure. There were synagogues and all that, but it was predominantly Gentile. It was outside of the land of promise. This was Gentile land. And like I said before, believers were first labeled Christians in Antioch, outside of the land, Gentile land. That's where they were first called Christians, was in Antioch. Okay, so now Colossians chapter 2. Keep that in mind. Paul is writing to the church. Who's bothering the church? Based on what information we have in the book of Acts and all of other and Galatians, like we just read, who was contending with Paul in Galatians. Same thing, right? So what do we have in Colossians? We have Paul warning the church there that there are going to be Judaizers that come to you, and they're going to tell you you have to keep the law of Moses and the Sabbath to be saved. That's what Acts 15 says. Same type of group, same group that chased Paul through his entire ministry through the book of Acts. That is who Paul is writing about to a Gentile church. So to twist that and say that Colossians 2 is telling the church at Colossians that you need to keep the Sabbath and the feast and don't let people judge you for that, that is a twisting. That's not true to the context. And I know that for sure because I've read the book of Acts. And I know what the book of Acts says, and I know who Paul's enemies were in the book of Acts, and I know what it says in Galatians as well. Paul really makes it clear who the ones contending with them were. No doubt about it. So it's Paul is speaking out against that, against using the righteous law of Moses like a yoke and a club on the Gentiles. That's who Paul is talking about. That's the context of Colossians chapter 2. It is not about you have to keep the Sabbath and the feast and don't let anybody judge you for that. He's addressing the Judaizers. He's saying there's going to be some come to you that is going to impose that on you. Don't let them judge you. That's what he's saying. And let's read it and see if that's what it says. Let's just start in chapter 2. We'll just read chapter 2. Okay? Colossians chapter 2, because I want you to understand how great a struggle I have on your behalf, and for those who are at Laodicea, and for all those who have not seen my face in the flesh, so that their hearts may be encouraged, having been held together in love, even unto all the wealth of the full assurance of understanding, unto the full knowledge of Yahuwah's secret mystery, that is the Messiah, the secret of Christ, of the Messiah, right? Paul talks about it all through his epistles. In whom are hidden, Yeshua, all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. I say this so that no one will delude you with persuasive argument. Because, even though I am absent in body, nevertheless I am with you in spirit, rejoicing to see your good order and the stability of your faith in Messiah. Therefore, as you have received Messiah Yeshua the Master, so walk in him, having been firmly rooted and being built up in him, and having been established in your faith, just as you were instructed, and abounding with thanksgiving. See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, and not according to Messiah, because in him all the fullness of deity dwells bodily. Philosophers, the Greeks, all them, right? Don't let them subject you. And in him you have been filled, pleroma, filled to the point of overflowing, who is the head over all rule and authority, in whom you were also circumcised with a circumcision made without hands. Why did he say that? Because there was those that went behind him saying you have to be circumcised in your flesh and keep the law of Moses to be saved. Acts 15 tells us this. The Judaizers followed him everywhere, like I just said. That's why he's addressing this. He's saying that was a type, that was a picture. No man can enter the land the covenanted land of promise without being circumcised in your flesh. And it was stringent. Why? Because it was a picture of a circumcised heart to enter the new covenant. That's the whole point of it. That's why it was so stringent, because it was a picture of the circumcision of the spirit by the Messiah. Circumcision without hands, in the removal of the body of the flesh, in the circumcision of the Messiah. We are a new creation in Messiah. We are not dead men walking anymore, dead people walking. Verse 12, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised up with him through faith in the working of Yahuwah, who raised him from the dead. That's what baptism, new covenant baptism, pictures. It's water. If you're going to be water baptized, there's nothing wrong with water baptism, but understand it is a picture. That's why my friend, Pastor Bruce, is wrong. It's not a requirement. It's not a physical act to save you. It is a picture of Baptism means identification. That's why when the nation of Israel was baptized unto Moses through the Red Sea on dry land, they were identified with Moses. They were following him. He was delivering them. That's what baptism is. And it was all done that way to picture the union we have with Messiah as our head and we are his body. And it's done by the Spirit, like John the Baptist said, I baptize you with water unto repentance. But someone's coming after me who's going to baptize you with the Holy Spirit. That's the type picturing the reality. That's what's here. So, who raised him from the dead. Verse 13, Colossians 2:13. And you being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive with him, having graciously forgiven all of our transgressions, having canceled out the certificate of debt consisting of decrees against us, which were hostile to us. He has also taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. Having disarmed the rulers and authorities, he made a public display of them, having triumphed over them in him. Therefore, no one is to judge you in food and drink, or in respects to a festival, or a new month, or a Shabbat. Which, okay, do we hear what verse 17 is going to plainly tell us? Things which are only a shadow of what is to come, but the great contrast word, on the other hand, the substance belongs to Messiah. Those are pictures, those are types, those were given to show Messiah. They all picture the fullness which is Messiah. They are types and shadows, they are not the reality. Yeshua is. That's what Paul's saying. So don't let anybody judge you on the types when you have the reality. That's what Paul is telling them. Let no one keep defrauding you of your prize by delighting in self-abasement and the worship of the angels, going into detail about visions he has seen, being puffed up for nothing by his fleshly mind, and not holding fast to the head, Yeshua, from whom the entire body, being supplied and held together by joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from Yahuwah. Man, that is just so clear. If you have died with Messiah to the elementary principles of the world, why, as if you were living in the world, do you submit yourself to decrees? What decrees is he talking about here? Do not handle, nor taste, nor touch. Where are those decrees found? They're found in the law of Moses. That's what they're found. That's what he's talking about. He's talking to Gentiles, and he's telling them, do not let a Judaizer put you under the law of Moses because you have stepped out of that and you have stepped into the new covenant. Now, were they wrong for doing that, for keeping the law? No. We've already addressed that. They're not wrong for that. They're wrong for imposing it on another. Because these Gentiles are those that see each day as alike, like Paul talks in Romans 14. Each day is alike. This other group of believing Jewish people didn't live like that, did they? They honored the Sabbath. They honored the festivals of Yahuwah. There's nothing wrong with that. They were the other group, like Paul says in Romans 14. One person acknowledges a day above another. One person acknowledges each day alike. Let each one be convinced in their own minds, but don't be a stumbling block to each other and cause each other to sin. That's Paul's point in Romans 14, and that's exactly Paul's point here. Do not let the law be imposed on you because that's and that is true because that is exactly who was following Paul, like I said through the book of Acts, and it is exactly the group that the contention within Acts chapter 15 is. That is the example. That is the example of a Judaizer, a believer who was trying to impose the law of Moses onto others, onto Gentiles. This is very clear. You're not to do that. And so is Galatians. We just read it. So that's my, or in my, and I have to be careful to say that is my opinion. This is my interpretation of what Yahuwah has shown me based on everything else Paul had to say in the book of Acts and the God, all of it together. This is the conclusion I've come to. And I think it's sound. And I say that with humility, but I have to be true to what I perceive the Spirit has shown me. And I know it's true because when you read Galatians and you keep going in chapter 3 and then you get into chapter 4 and he tells us about Sarah and Hagar, and then you take that understanding and you put it right here in Colossians 2 and drop it in place, lo and behold, you have the truth. This Colossians 2 is talking about Judaizers. Paul is warning the Gentile church at Colossae to beware of the Judaizers. So I hope you guys, whoever hears this, I hope you found something of value. And I would invite you to study the book of Acts if you haven't. And most importantly, lay everything at the feet of the Messiah. Thank you.